Good morning, Jamie.
Good morning, Shadab. How are you doing this? I guess we're recording this a little bit later than normal on a Sunday, but welcome to Sunday morning and the weekend.
Yeah, I mean, this week felt a bit short when it comes to the AI world because everybody exhausted themselves the last week itself. So, um, not that kind of a hectic week, but it's been a fine Sunday morning here.
Yeah, it's sun shining. Anytime the sun's shining, it's a good day.
True. All right. So this week we are going to cover a bunch of news. We'll talk about some of the new breakthroughs, in the industry. For example, we'll talk about what's going on with the GPT-5 post GPT-5 release. A couple of changes that they have done, a revert of some of the features, etc. We will talk about that. Then we'll also talk about some of the news that we had about the Meta's AI guidelines, etc., which were challenged and questioned.
Sounds good. Looking forward to getting into it.
Greetings. Welcome to the AI Files podcast. If you're looking to stay up to date on the AI, this is the podcast for you. I'm Shadab Hussain. I'm the director of AI at Microsoft, and I'm your co-host.
Hello, everybody. Jamie Basilico, as you know already. I'm the other co-host here for the AI Files. My day job is a data and AI technical specialist and architect. And as a reminder, please note this is not an official Microsoft channel, so the views and opinions expressed by myself and Shadab are our own and do not represent the views of Microsoft.
So, Jimmy, I wanted to actually quickly talk about in our AI Code of the Week about something that Mustafa Suleiman posted. Mustafa Suleiman, who is the CEO of Microsoft AI, and in the past, the co-founder of the Google DeepMind, actually DeepMind, and also Inflection AI. So he said, this is a LinkedIn post, and he said, "Code, as AI models get commoditized, the value will be added in the final layer of orchestration, not just routing to just one best model, but coordinating multiple models to combine strengths and create chain of debate. Chain of thought," he said, "is a solo model thinking out loud. Chain of debate is team of models thinking together. After all, this is how progress gets made in our world: debate, discussion, bouncing ideas off others, finding blind spots, and getting feedback. Amazingly, it seems true of AI as well. Reasoning becomes peer review, trust, accuracy, and quality go up. Chain of thought is going multiplayer." Unquote. I thought it was pretty interesting, and it kind of like indicate where the future is heading, Jamie. So if you look at it, what it means is really that the typical LLMs before reasoning come came along, they were like essentially just simple prediction, but they often used to lose the context, right? And then that's why they could not count that well. They could not do some of the puzzles, etc. We all know about it, right? Like, for example, the famous meme of how many R's in the strawberry, things
Yeah.
like that, right? They lost track of that. And then the reasoning came along, which was first time it was, I think, in the model O1 from OpenAI. What the reasoning did is essentially brought inherent chain of thought. Before that, you had to induce that. You had to design it externally and then ask them to actually do a chain of thought explicitly. But then reasoning made it inherent in the model. But the reasoning was still separate, right? Chain of thought. What it would do is basically break down a question or a problem step by step and then solve it. So without losing context, right? So it will force itself to actually make sure that it is breaking it down smaller and not losing context and thinking out loud, right? And we will also know how it is approaching it. What Mustafa is talking about is that okay, the next step is really not just thinking out loud, but actually debating and discussing together. So the team of models or agents thinking together and working together and challenging itself, right? So that's one way of doing it, right? You could do it as well. But then we also saw just very recently, this is what Google DeepMind's latest they had actually released just a couple of weeks ago, right? In that release, they actually released something called Deep Think AI. And that what these Deep Think does, Gemini 2.5 Deep Think does, is there are basically multiple paths going on. Okay, it's not just one chain of thought going on. There are multiple paths going on, and that then becomes a debate internally before you get actually a final response. So there are multiple threads that spawn that debates together and then try to arrive at a consolidated response, right? So it basically, that is exactly what we saw in that model, and it is kind of a future that Suleiman is talking about. Now that could happen within the model, or it could happen in the design layer outside. You could do it multiple ways, but that seems to be like the next wave of the evolution of the model that comes along.
Yeah, when I first heard that, or when we were chatting about it, it kind of reminded me of mixture of experts, in the sense that you've got these models, and you could break down different execution tasks, and it splits things across those models. This is kind of, at least in my opinion, something along that same line, because you've got these mixture of experts, which could be different models, and instead of just being the way that they break down and think about a single task or request, or whatever you want to call it, they're actually putting everything together, and it's really debating against those different models, reasoning tools, to come up with a better response or a better hypothesis. And it's really that next evolution, or at least potentially where we're going with it.
Correct. I mean, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, mixture of expert is exactly the kind of foundation. The only thing is, I think mixture of expert, I believe, only invokes certain segments of the model for a
Right.
specific task. In this case, I think the multiple experts will continue working together. And then arrive at a response. I don't know how that exactly work in terms of like what triggers what, like in terms of how they will go on a separate path. Why will they not all think alike? But I think they've found some ways to actually induce that kind of independent thinking and then consolidating response. But it would be exciting that it's just also an indication of where things are headed.
Indeed, indeed. Um, Speaking of where things are heading, this one is something I like to put under the positive note on artificial intelligence. So there's been some medical breakthroughs on coming up with antibiotic. I think everyone knows, the more that you take antibiotics, some of these bacterial infections or things that we're trying to resist to the antibiotic. So we go back to what can we use AI for? And one of the things is to use it to determine new compounds. And in this case, that's exactly what things have been actually been done. So this is really a breakthrough in antibiotic discovery. And this was actually being led by MIT, or researchers in MIT, to use generative AI to come up with new compounds specifically for two bacterial, one being MRSA and the other one being gonorrhea. And what they did was, yes, they produced two new compounds, and right now it's actually been done in the lab. And some of the trials that they've been able to do against infected mice actually showed really strong ability in terms of using this drug and early promise. So what they ended up doing was taking all of the different chemical structures of known antibiotics and their effects on bacteria, and then use that to predict what would be the best compounds, and coming up with new designs, basically determining what would be the best molecule structure for these new antibiotics. And what they ended up doing is actually creating something that has, as I just said, worked against those two different bacterial infections. Is this ready to be rolled out? No. You still need to go through human trials, and go through the refinement and various different safety tests. But we might be 2 years away from actually going into that clinical trial. So this really poses an opportunity, because obviously this is just two of many different bacterial strains, but being able to use tools like AI, and as I mentioned already, they used it to really determine, what would be the next best combination of molecules to solve and serve. This really has profound impact because we talk about what it's the these bacteria being able to resist the antibiotics that actually results in millions of deaths annually. So using something like this, and again, maybe we call this segment AI for good, right? Being able to develop new things that could actually help the human race from a health perspective rather than just, like, hey, what am I doing today by doing a search? So I look at this as positive.
True. I mean, um, this is just unbelievable aspects and the benefits of the Gen AI that that really excite me because we see so many times, Jamie, this bacterial resistance has been so difficult a problem, and I've seen so many on the personal side as well. I've gone through this. I've seen so many cases where people have lost lives simply because of the antibacterial, the medicines not working. It's not working. It happens a lot, actually. This is a big problem, and I hope that this would be, I think, probably one of the biggest advantage of the Gen AI that we can deliver.
Yep.
On the other hand, other than this benefit, there are also, of course, some downsides as well. And then, Meta again came in the news. So Reuters, they actually did an investigation and they came out with this investigative report that Meta's AI rules were actually, they had a little bit slippages, right? So they, in their guidelines, they explicitly allowed certain aspects which were highly controversial. For example, it says that, okay, Meta's internal guideline is basically that, okay, you can permit some behavior in the AI chatbot to allow engaging in romantic or sensual conversations with children, right? Or you could allow generating false medical information, racial biases, violent imagery, things like that. And this was all basically in the policy detail. Now, again, not that the guidelines say, okay, you promote it, but certain cases, right? Certain example, and I'll give you certain examples. So this is in the policy detail, a document titled Gen AI Content Risk Standards. It's 200 pages. It was approved by Meta's legal, public policy, engineering teams. So everybody aligned, very well documented. Reuters got hold of it and they reached out to Meta, and then Meta said, "Oh, okay, no, actually, we are gonna revert all of this as soon as they reached out," which means that they agree that this is not acceptable, but they allowed it earlier, and now they've actually reverted it. They say that they're removing all of that. So basically, things like this. For example, for the children and the sensual content, chatbots were allowed to describe children in romantic or artistic terms. Like, for example, quote, your youthful form is a work of art, right? Unquote. Now, for some people, it's harmless, right? There's nothing in it really. For others, it could, it could trigger emotions, things like that. The explicit sexual descriptions of children were definitely marked as unacceptable. Then there were example of the racial content, right? That, okay, you can allow certain uh, conclusion that, okay, certain races are less intelligent than others, but you cannot call them certain, like the chatbot will not allow you to use certain slurs, for example. And likewise, there were many examples, right? The violence, right? The punching one person another, punching, like boy punching a girl is allowed, but the gore or death is not allowed. There are examples like that. So certain cases, however, those also become controversial and like question, and now they're reverting it. But it has led to is that now some of the legislatures, representatives, etc., they're actually calling for the investigation into it. So, this could actually bubble up and create a trouble for Meta, who has always been under the radar for actually many such controversial things. But this is another downside of it. It's very hard to actually resist. By the way, that reminds me, Jamie, there is a reason why many of these states are taking certain actions like this. For example, Illinois has restricted AI use in mental health therapy. It has become the third US state after Utah and Nevada to ban therapists from using AI chatbots for treatment or client communication. And this new legislation is named Therapy Resources Oversight. It forbids companies from marketing such tools as therapy substitutes, right? So chatbots are, since they are also getting into therapy, I just wanted to remind that that some of the states are also taking actions to prohibit it.
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously there's two parts to this. One, anything that puts children in harm's way, whether or not it was intended or just a call it a byproduct that no one actually thought of in the first place. Those obviously have to be removed, remediated, and adhere to in terms of obviously certain principles. There's the other side of this, which is like how do the states regulate content. I'm certainly a believer that states have their own autonomy and they can work. There's obviously good behind the things that companies and or states are trying to do. There's a fine line though between overstepping boundaries. I don't think anything you just said is overstepping boundaries in terms of states. I think things do need to be regulated. I know we're probably going to chat about it a little bit later on around GPT-5, but there was some outcry around some of the models being removed, and that kind of led its way, or was directed by the sense of people wanting to use these models as either therapists or confidants or just like, hey, you're my friend. That's where I think states need to kind of step in a little bit to help provide guidelines, but it is a slippery slope. I know we're getting a little bit off topic as it related to what Meta was doing with things showing up in their documents, but it is interrelated because it's all part of how do we as a society think about what AI is, what it should be, and then how do we regulate it. Much bigger topic than just, hey, what's in a document that Meta had put in.
True.
So speaking of ChatGPT, very quick segue. That was a hard shift on this one, but it's come out that the ChatGPT or from OpenAI, their mobile app obviously dominates the market. Just anecdotally, every time I talk to people, most people are using ChatGPT, but now we look at the numbers since its launch, which has been over 2 years ago. It's now generating $2 billion in global consumer spending, making it the very clear leader in chatbot apps. Obviously, it's just had explosive growth over or at least year to date in 2025. In just the first 7 months of this year, the app earned 1.35 billion, and that's almost a 700% increase year over year, and that's about $193 million a month. And when you compare that to the competitors, it's like leaps and bounds. I mean, the closest one is Grok, or at least one of them, which is only 25 million or 25.6 million over that same period. So it's really about the reach of this app. 690 million installs globally. India leads the pack. To be honest with you, I would have thought it was the U.S., but India has a little over 13% of the installs worldwide. U.S. 10%, but U.S. users spend the most per download at $10, contributing to over 38% of the overall revenue. So again, when we look at where this is, ChatGPT certainly leads the pack as compared to things like Claude or Grok or Copilot. So again, it just speaks to OpenAI and I'll call it their dominance, at least on the user base. We can argue whether or not their models are state of the art, even with GPT-5, but at least from the mobile app and what it means from an economy and people, the way that they're using it, clear leadership there.
Yeah, this is interesting, Jamie. I think the consumer world seems to be completely ruled by the OpenAI, right? Single-handedly, pretty much, right? I mean, the nearest competition is too far away. On the other hand, the enterprise, as we discussed like last week, I think how the cloud has taken a lead, and now it actually leads that segment compared to the OpenAI. So I think OpenAI still need to actually make sure that they continue to grow their enterprise, but keeping the control in the consumer. Now, I understand few things happen actually in the last couple of weeks since the GPT-5 release, that the people you talked about it, like GPT-4, people are just not able to let go. What really happened there?
Yeah. So, what was interesting, if anyone was like reading Reddit or the various different outlets on Twitter X, people got really annoyed, and I want to put some context around this. I mean, there's millions of people, as I just said, that use these tools. The vast majority, didn't say anything, and to be honest with you, like you didn't even know that GPT-5, hit the market, because if you look on any mainstream news, it was barely even mentioned, if anything at all. In our circles, obviously, I was waiting for this for the last year or so. But when GPT-5 hit, they removed a lot of the models, or they removed the models to just use the model router, which we'll talk about in a minute or two. But people have deep relationships, and I'm using that literally in the term that you're probably thinking, a relationship with their chat GPT on their phone. They were using it not only for um, like therapy or using it as therapist, but truly as your friend. And people literally overnight lost their friend, lost their therapist, because there was no more GPT-4. And GPT-5 is a little bit more, I don't want to say robotic, but the answers that it provides are like, here it is, black and white. It's not that empathetic, let me talk to you kind of model, unless you're directed to. But so people really felt like, hey, you just removed my best friend. So there was a lot of that uproar um, around, I don't have the same tools that I have. So
Mm,
the other part of this too is, like, me as a paid user of the Plus model, we used to have all these different choices of models, which, one hand was great, the other hand maybe not so much. But as I'll call myself and you as a pro user, we know when to use O3 versus O4 mini high versus GPT-4 or whatever the model was. Most people don't, so they're like, the intent was to make it simple for people, and they certainly made it simple by just having GPT-5. But like I said before, a lot of people missed or wanted the old model back, or at least the ability to do that. Um, Sam Altman actually put out what I'll say, they heard a lot of this chatter. We're not going into the depths of it now, but he put out some statements and things up on X on, all right, these are things that need to change, blah blah blah. So ultimately, what happened, if you look at your Chat GPT now, they did bring back 4.0, at least on the Plus users. So it's come back as a legacy model. So yeah, there was a lot of interesting things. The biggest part that I take about with this, it's not about what's on ChatGPT. It's not about what model and what the model router does. It actually speaks more to me about how people are, how we as a society are using these tools as a aid in our daily lives. And you go back to the restriction on AI use in mental health in Illinois. I think this is like a poster child of it. To me, this really brought up or bubbled up to the surface, you know, the reliance and the, I don't want to call it compulsive, but the connection that people have to something like this AI. And if you remove it, what implications does that have on someone's mental psyche, their wellness? I think it's eye opening, in my opinion.
it's amazing to see how integrated it is becoming to so many people's lives, right? I mean, I'll tell you one. Example, Jamie, I scored one over AI yesterday. So I went to the tennis court, right, and I took my ball machine there and I practiced. And then when I was coming back and loading that back into my car, I realized that the handle was loose and one screw fell off somewhere. I said, okay, it's going to be tough, right? I mean, like finding out that small screw, like probably about half an inch, and it's going to be pain. Though I did want to go back and make sure that I find it. So I thought, okay, let me trace back and find out wherever I went to see where that screw could be, right? A long shot because screw is so tiny. What I did is I actually used the Chat Plus, my subscription, and I started that voice feature and started doing the live video and asked ChatGPT to help me find it. Okay, and as I'm tracing back, wherever I'm going, I'm showing it the live video feed, and it gave me the tip, right? To say, okay, look into the edges, go there. Seems like there's a pavement, and go there, check that out, things like that. And they say, okay, like slow down, let me see, I'm also looking around. And I found that it was an interesting use case, right, to use that as well. Many times we lose things, small things. So I did couple of trace back. Finally I could spot it, and ChatGPT could not. So yay, I still won. But it is still trying to give me a company and some advice. Says, okay, look over there, look there. Generally things can get lost into this brick edges and things like that, right? So it's just that, I think the resolution and the camera and my speed of walking was not enough for it to identify that before
Yeah, I was about to say it might be an indication that you need a phone upgrade.
and
Better
that could be
camera,
true.
right?
Yeah, that could be true. That's a good reminder.
So,
um,
just getting into some rapid fire news. A few things to kind of just mention off here is Perplexity. This one was perplexing to me, to be a little pun in cheek on this one. Perplexity offered to buy Chrome from Google for billions, for more than what it's raised in its own company. You know, again, Perplexity has, they put out something called Comet, which is their browser, and I was just perplexed on why they wanted to take Chrome. I mean, Chrome is synonymous, in my opinion, with Google, but that one was interesting to say the least.
Yeah, in fact, Perplexity has, I think, some time back, they came out with a statement saying that no, actually, Chrome belongs to Google. Google should continue to have it, even though we are competing against Google. But this one, Google owes, right? And we owe to the Google to keep it with Google. So that's what. So yeah, I mean, but I think they're realizing that it is becoming increasingly difficult for Google to keep Chrome. There is a lot of oversight on this. So let's see what will happen.
Yep.
Well, in the other news, Jeff Hinton, Jamie, he actually warned of existential risk without empathetic AI. What he's saying is that, hey, there is about 10-20% chance that AI could wipe out humanity if you don't build in the empathetic AI or maternal instinct into the AI so that, it is more protective and it safeguards the human well-being.
Yep. This next rapid fire, I definitely agree with. Universities, everything from Columbia, NYU, MIT, and others are actually expanding their coursework, including AI focused tools in that as well. And it's really to prepare students for the real world that is driven by AI. And I think this is great because, again, I mentioned this a few times. My son's in at a university, is a senior right now, and some of the things that they were teaching him, I'm like, they should be using AI for this. So, the more that colleges take that up, I think that's a good thing.
That's true. Jamie, I had a quick conversation with my alma mater, and I had a session with them, and I realized the same thing that, like, it's so important, the academia, to actually continue to evolve and learn about it because it is impacting them in so many ways. Students have expectation, the corporates have expectation that the workforce will be prepared coming out of the universities. They have expectation to control the cheating, right? So that because my daughter goes to the college and she said that some people are outright cheating, right? And she feels disappointed that like she's losing out because somebody's people are like so. And of course the everybody expect the university to control that, right? So there is just so much expectation, so many challenges, and there are also people, right? They're also trying to just like it just too much expectation, challenges, etc., but also of course a lot of opportunities and potential. So I think it is a great area, and I'm trying to actually work with some of the academia to try to understand these challenges and help them wherever we can. But I totally agree, this, I think this is a good step.
Cool.
And
So switching over to launches, I know there's again, I wouldn't call it a crazy week with launches, but we're never at a loss for new things coming to the market or new releases. So what do you have for us today as it relates to Claude?
oh yeah, so Claude, of course they keep doing a few good things. So let's talk about what Claude has done. So essentially, Claude is doing some minor changes, but one of the things that I'm seeing is, Jamie, that they're very steady with the changes, right? They keep doing changes pretty much every week, right? Small features, but some innovative feature that they have been actually doing. So, for example, like they have come out with this new ways to learn in Cloud Code and the Cloud app. So rather than just simply allowing you to actually give the code out, right? When you use these application and simply you say, okay, create me a web app or whatever that you want to do, rather than just that, it basically has two new modes. One is explanatory, where Claude explains its reasoning step by step, and it shares the architecture decisions and the trade offs and best practices. So essentially, it gives you much more explanation, compared to the regular mode where, it gives a little bit less. I just tell that, okay, this is what I'm doing. But here it explains more so that, it becomes more explanatory, and then you learn more as you go along with it, right? And the second is learning mode, where basically Claude pauses to ask you to code to do tasks, and like some specific segments of the code, it will ask you to code actually, and acting more like a peer programmer to help you learn while getting real work done. And of course, if you can do you can ask for the help and things like that. But it kind of forces you, and I think that's a pretty good balance of things. This learning, style basically, and this learning style, which is basically earlier it was introduced in Cloud for Education. Now it's going to be available to everyone, and they can make use of it.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, and we saw this. OpenAI introduce something within their tools as well. I think it's called Study and Learn. So all these different foundational companies are providing this learning method, and I think that's good because in some cases, especially from an educational standpoint, you want the children, you want the young adults to learn rather than just handing them the answers.
True.
So this is certainly a way of doing that, and obviously it could work its way into corporations as well. If you've got these junior programmers, at some point in time they need to understand what they're actually developing rather than just having this AI agent developing everything for them.
Yeah.
Um,
By the way, Sonnet 4 now supports up to 1 million tokens of context on the API, which is a kind of it's a 5x increase. So it's a lot. It's a equivalent of 75,000 lines of code.
Yeah, and we're seeing, all the companies are actually increasing. Nothing's really yet to this 1 million, but as we keep on moving forward with these different models, and we have, these new capabilities in terms of that context window and size. So great to
Yeah.
see. So we
But
got
but
some pricing up
also,
here.
yeah, but also other thing is, Jamie, what they've done is, which is a little bit like, I think, kind of new. I haven't seen this kind of a pricing tier. What they've done is that if the prompts are less than 200K, you have the standard pricing. But when you go above 200K of the prompt, the pricing actually gets double for the input, and or 50% rise in the output, basically. Of course, they recommend that use a prompt caching and things like that. But this extra large window of the prompt, this 5x increase does not come cheap, right? So that is, I think, important to see. And you will wonder why. I'm not sure too much about this, but it could be that because I think, as the context windows increase, there is a lot more, I think, efforts that need to be in the behind the scene, making sure that it doesn't become that, that needle in the haystack and things like that, right? So I think there is more processing required to make sure that the larger context window is handled well. That's why I think this price is increasing.
Yeah, and this is going to sound I'll get a little technical on this one. When you create applications, there's different APIs that can be used, and specifically, I'm going to talk about OpenAI. There's the responses API, and you have to handle the previous context when you're actually passing things into a model. Developers can get lazy. They could literally just take, hey, whatever I just did in my last question and output and response, let me just package that up, add it to my new one and throw it out to the model. While you could do that, it's definitely not efficient. There's different things or different techniques that could be used. Obviously, injecting context through RAG, but there's other things that can be done as well. Like you could use the past response and then send that into another LLM to actually get a summarization. Then you pass that into chain of your chain of talk, or they call it chat turning. So these larger context windows, I think in some cases may offer a path to the junior developers that don't think about these higher level techniques. And if those junior developers do exactly that, it's going to be more costly. So the bottom line always comes down to the dollar at companies. Now, I'm sure, Anthropic or OpenAI, they're going to be totally fine with, hey, just throw everything you want out there because it's going to be more money to those companies. But I think some of the responsibility is also on the developer to be more understanding, as well as then be more efficient in the way that they use these larger context windows. Anyway,
Correct.
So one quick thing, and I know you've got some really interesting stuff to talk about in the model router, because it does tie back into some of the things we were chatting about before. But one last quick thing, Oracle teamed up with Google to provide the ability for the Gemini models to run on OCI, or Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. So this is obviously a big thing for Oracle customers, because now they've got the ability to run a very capable model in terms of the cloud tools. There's also talk for expanding that over time. So future integrations to integrate with Vertex AI, which again is the Google platform for video, speech, imaging, and music generation, as well as bring in some industry-based models, the Med LM. Kind of talking about what we were chatting earlier about medical breakthroughs, but some of these things will be able to be brought onto the Oracle platform. The other thing too, Oracle, what are they getting out of this other than being able to host and offer those Google models? Well, it's also going to be, those same models are going to be interwoven into Oracle Fusion cloud apps. So this will basically enhance their workflows using generative AI in things like HR and supply chain and other, other horizontal kind of functions within their cloud apps. So
Interesting. Oracle is still finding ways
to be
continue
relevant.
to be relevant.
Yeah.
Okay, so Jamie, you refer to this. This is a model router. Actually, we will just quickly talk about. So, in the GPT-5 world, which we talked about, there are actually three variants. You can say kind of a base model. They don't call it base, but say this is a base model, and then there is a mini and there is a nano, right? Now, and GPT-5 also has settings. For example, Sam Altman actually talked on the X about that. There is an auto. Basically, it kind of find a balance between like how much it needs to think, because remember, this language and reasoning, everything is consolidated in the GPT-5. So there is a auto, but then there is also a fast setting, and then there's a thinking setting, and you can play with that. But then still, as a customer, as a user, you would often wonder, okay, which model should I pick, right? Yes, I can play with some of the settings, but then also I don't know if I can use a mini or nano, or which one will be sufficient. And what if I have a one complex query and two very simple query? How do I do that, right? And that's where this new offering from Microsoft in the AI Foundry comes along, which is basically model router, right? It is exactly what it sounds like, right? What it does is, it based on the complexity of the query. It assesses which model is suitable to use. And for example, for a simple query, like on the screen that you see here, like how's the weather in Paris in May? It's a simple query from that perspective. So it will just simply go and choose the simplest model in its scope. And if it is a complex query, let's say plan a 5 day itinerary from Paris to Venice for a vegan family of 10, then it's going to use more complex version of the model, right? So that's the first step. So first step is triaging and understanding the complexity of the query. And the second step is that, then it assesses the input parameters like prompt, tool, and then dynamically routes to the optimal model route. And the step three is basically the endpoint returns underlying model's response. The thing is that the model router is a specific, it itself is a model endpoint within the AI Foundry. Essentially, it's an endpoint. You use it just like a model, and internally, currently, in the AI Foundry, it has in its purview GPT 4.1 variants as well as GPT-5 variants, and I believe there is a O3 mini or O4 mini variants also. So roughly about 7 different models variant. It will assess among them which one is more appropriate. So it's a fine-tuned model specifically used for triaging the query and picking the right model. The best advantage of this is it optimizes the cost and the speed because it will pick the right model. So there could be 50 to 60% of the cost saving. That's huge. That's a significant advantage of using it. And of course, the speed will be much higher for simple query. You don't have to route the simple one to the complex model.
Yeah, like you said, some of the biggest benefits of this are really the speed and price, and you have the models available to you. I know that in this picture we're showing GPT 4.1, which are certainly some of the models that are in there, but obviously GPT 5 is part of the model mix in terms of the routing. At least from the Azure side, as of today, when we're recording this, which is August 17th, you have to be gated, or there is gating for the GPT-5 model. So once you have that gating, it opens that up in the model router. So I'm sure that'll change over time, where it just be available to everybody once capacity is rolled out into different areas. But again, it's a great thing. You just use a single deployment, which is called model router, and you get all these advantages. I use it today, not only to demo, but in a couple of the small little apps that I've built, just for myself.
Yeah, I think that is amazing. And OpenAI does not have, they have an auto model picker, but that's in a chat GPT application, right? They don't have it as an API or
Yeah,
endpoint in the enterprise version. The other thing is, Jamie, the only downside is that, because it's a multiple model, the common denominator has to be the lowest context window size, right? So if you have to, let's say, whatever the model versions are, whichever is the lowest context window size, that is what you need to give as an input, because otherwise it won't be able to redirect it to a lower window if you give the higher
yeah,
input window size, right? So that's another little bit downside. You just need to plan it well, but there is a huge upside in terms of the cost saving and speed.
makes sense. All right. With that, I know we're at time for today, and there's always news, and it always goes forward. I'm sure we'll have more for everybody next week.
Absolutely, Jamie. Have a good weekend. Bye,
Thanks.
everyone.
You
Enjoy.
too. Bye bye.